1 month after the Crucible, the entire trainee cohort assembled in the Hall of Recognition. The hall was the most sacred space in the Academy, and its walls were lined with the names of every species that had earned the designation of apex predator. Since the Academy's founding 3 centuries ago, Commander Rexus stood at the center of the raised platform, and his golden eyes swept across the hundreds of trainees who filled the seats below. "Today we recognize excellence," Rexus announced. But not the kind of excellence that most of you expected. A massive display screen flickered to life behind him, and footage began to play. It showed a forest on Varak 9 and 2 figures moving through the trees. One was clearly injured and struggling, and the other was small and human and refusing to leave her behind. "This is Trainee Una Park," Rexus said, "and Trainee Cirith Kale." The footage continued and showed the Velcor pack emerging from the shadows and beginning their pursuit. Murmurs spread through the crowd as trainees recognized what they were seeing. 8 Velcor, Rexus said. Apex predators specifically evolved to hunt and kill, and these 8 creatures pursued 2 wounded trainees for over 6 hours. The footage showed Una helping Cirith walk, and it showed the steady, relentless pace that the human maintained. And it showed the Velcor falling back one by one as their energy depleted. Trainee Park did not run, Rexus continued. She did not hide, and she did not abandon her fellow trainee, and instead, she did something that many of you would consider impossible. The footage showed the final Velcor stopping and turning away, and the assembled trainees fell completely silent. She outlasted them, Rexus said. A human outlasted 8 apex predators through nothing but endurance and willpower. The display changed to show different footage, and this time it was the confrontation with the Thornback. "This is a territorial alpha predator," Rexus explained. 12 feet tall and armored and capable of killing most species in single combat. The footage showed Una stepping forward and meeting the creature's eyes and standing absolutely still as it threatened her. Seconds passed in the recording, and then the Thornback backed away and retreated. Trainee Park faced down an apex predator with nothing but eye contact, Rexus said, and the predator yielded. He let that sink in before continuing. "For generations this academy has measured apex status by the obvious metrics of claws and fangs and venom and speed and strength, but we forgot something important." Rexus turned to look directly at Una, who sat in the front row with bandages still visible on her hands and feet. "Humans evolved as persistence predators," Rexus said. "They do not have natural weapons like other apex species, but they have something far more terrifying." He paused. "They do not stop," he said. "Ever. A human will follow prey across continents, and they will track it for days without rest, and they will maintain pursuit long after any other predator would have given up, and they will do this while injured and exhausted and outnumbered, because giving up is simply not in their nature." Rexus turned back to the assembled trainees. "Trainee Park has demonstrated the qualities that define a true apex predator and effective. Immediately, she's elevated to the warden track, and her squad ranking is increased to match." Applause began scattered at first, and then growing, and Una felt heat rise to her face as hundreds of predators acknowledged her. But the ceremony was not over. Cirith Kale rose from her seat and walked to the platform, and the crowd fell silent again. "Commander," Cirith said, "I request permission to speak." Rexus nodded. Cirith turned to face the crowd and took a deep breath. "When Trainee Park arrived at this academy, I treated her with contempt and cruelty," Cirith said. "I sabotaged her equipment, and I manipulated her assignments, and I did everything I could to make her fail, because I believed that humans did not belong among apex predators." She paused, and her voice became stronger. "I was wrong," Cirith said. "Completely and utterly wrong." She turned to face Una directly. "Trainee Park saved my life when she had every reason to leave me to die, and she carried me through hostile territory. while being hunted by predators, and she never once considered abandoning me, even though I had done nothing but try to destroy her. Cirith placed her hand over her heart in an Ithari gesture of deepest respect. By the customs of my people, I owe Trainee a debt of breath that can never be fully repaid, and I declare publicly that I will honor that debt for as long as I live. The hall was completely silent, and then slowly other trainees began to stand. Doran rose first and walked to stand beside Cirith, and other members of Squad 17 followed, and then trainees from other squads joined them until dozens of the Academy's deadliest students stood in acknowledgement of the human who had proven herself among them. Commander Vrexus watched with something that might have been satisfaction. "Trainee Park," he said. "Do you have anything to say?" Una stood slowly and walked to the platform and looked out at the crowd of predators who had once laughed at her. "I did not come here to prove that humans are better than anyone else," she said. "I came here because I believe that humans have something to offer, and I believed that if I was given a chance, I could show you what that something is." She paused. "Humans are not the strongest or the fastest or the deadliest, but we are the most stubborn creatures in the galaxy, and when we decide that something matters to us, we will pursue it to the ends of the universe. You are my fellow trainees," Una continued, "and that means you matter to me, and I will never abandon any of you, no matter how hard things get." The applause that followed was thunderous. Later that evening, Una walked through the Academy's memorial corridor, where the names of recognized apex species were carved into the walls. She stopped in front of an empty space and pulled out a small carving tool. Carefully and precisely, she carved a single word into the stone: humanity. Footsteps approached behind her, and she turned to find Doran standing there. "The Urkith have a phrase," Doran said, "that we use only for those we consider true warriors." He stepped forward and placed his massive hand on Una's shoulder. "You are one who hunts," he said. Una smiled. More footsteps came, and Cirith appeared, followed by other trainees who had stood for her in the hall. They gathered around the newly carved name and looked at it in silence. "I suppose this means we have to take humans seriously now," one of them said. "I suppose it does," another agreed. Una looked at the word she had carved and felt something settle into place inside her. She had come here alone and small and dismissed by everyone. But she had proven something that would change how the galaxy saw her species forever. Humans were apex predators, not because of claws or fangs or venom, but because they refused to give up. And as Una walked back to her quarters, surrounded by the deadliest creatures in the galaxy, who now called her friend, she knew that this was only the beginning, because humans did not just survive. They thrived, and nothing in the universe could stop them. The cave was small and damp, but it was defensible, and that was what mattered. Una had found it just before full darkness fell, and she had helped Cirith inside and propped the wounded Nithari against the wall before collapsing beside her. Every muscle in her body screamed with exhaustion, and her feet were blistered and bleeding inside her boots, and she had not slept in over 30 hours. But they were alive. "You should rest," Cirith said, and her voice was weak but steadier than before. "I can keep watch. You can barely keep your eyes open." Una replied, "I will take first watch." Human stubbornness. Cirith muttered, but there was no venom in her words anymore. Una checked Cirith's bandage and saw that the bleeding had stopped. But the Nithari would need proper medical attention soon, or infection would set in. "Why did you help me?" Cirith asked again. "And do not tell me it is because that is what humans do, because that is not an answer." Una was quiet for a moment as she considered the question. "On Earth," she said finally, "my grandmother used to tell me stories about our ancestors and how they survived in a world full of predators that were bigger and stronger and faster than us." "How did they survive?" Cirith asked. "They worked together," Una said. "They formed groups and they protected each other, even when it was dangerous, because one human alone was prey, but a group of humans was something else entirely. So you helped me because of instinct. I helped you because leaving someone to die when I could save them would make me something less than human, Una said, and I refuse to be less than what I am. Cirith was silent for a long time, and Una thought she might have fallen asleep, but then the Nethari spoke again. Among my people, Cirith said, we have a concept called the debt of breath, and it means that if someone saves your life, you owe them a debt that can never be fully repaid. You do not owe me anything, Una said. That is not how it works, Cirith replied. I owe you whether you want it or not. They sat in silence as the night deepened, and Una fought to keep her eyes open as her body demanded sleep. You have not slept, Cirith observed. Not since before you found me. I'm fine. You have been walking for over 40 hours, and you have not slept, and you are still awake, Cirith said, and there was wonder in her voice. How is that possible? Humans evolved to function without sleep for extended periods, Una said. It is one of our survival adaptations. Your species is terrifying, Cirith said, and for the first time it sounded like a compliment. Dawn came slowly, and Una roused Cirith, and they continued toward the extraction point. The terrain was treacherous, with loose rocks and hidden crevices, and Cirith's injury made the going slow, but they kept moving. By midday, they encountered another danger. A creature stood in their path, and it was unlike anything Una had seen before. It was massive, easily 12 feet tall, and it stood on 4 legs with a body covered in armored plates, and its head was crowned with horns that looked like they could gore through solid metal. Thornback, Cirith whispered, territorial alpha predator, and one of the most dangerous creatures on this moon. The Thornback had seen them, and it was watching them with small, intelligent eyes that held no fear. We cannot go around it, Cirith said, and we cannot fight it. Una studied the creature and felt something ancient stir. Inside her, humans had faced creatures like this before on Earth long ago, and they had not survived by running or fighting. They had survived by refusing to be prey. Stay behind me, Una said. What are you doing? Cirith demanded. Una did not answer, and instead she stepped forward and met the Thornback's gaze directly. The creature snorted and lowered its head, and its horns pointed toward her like weapons ready to strike. Una did not move. She stood absolutely still and kept her eyes locked on the Thornback, and she let every ounce of predatory intent flow through her gaze. You are not the most dangerous thing here, she thought, and I am not afraid of you. The Thornback stomped one massive foot, and the ground shook, but Una held her position. Seconds passed that felt like hours, and the creature's posture shifted from aggressive to uncertain. Una did not blink. The Thornback made a sound that was almost like a question, and then slowly it began to back away. It turned its massive body and walked into the underbrush and disappeared. Cirith stared at Una with her mouth open. How was all she could say. Predators recognize other predators, Una said, and the ones that do not back down are always the most dangerous. They walked past the place where the Thornback had stood, and Cirith kept glancing at Una as if seeing her for the first time. You faced down an apex predator with nothing but eye contact, Cirith said. Humans have been doing that for millions of years. Una replied, we just forgot that we could. The extraction point came into view as the second sun began to set, and Una felt her legs finally start to fail her. She stumbled, and Cirith caught her, and for the last stretch of the journey, it was the Nethari who supported the human. They walked into the extraction zone together and found other trainees already gathered and waiting. Silence fell as everyone saw them, Una covered in dirt and blood and exhaustion, and Cirith leaning on her for support with a bandaged wound in her side. Darin the Urkith rose from where he had been sitting and walked toward them, and he stopped in front of Una and bowed his head. It was a gesture of respect that Una had never seen him give to anyone. You made it, Darin said. We made it, Una corrected, and then her legs gave out completely. Doran caught her before she hit the ground and carried her to the medical station, and the last thing Una saw before exhaustion finally claimed her was Commander Vrexus watching from across the camp with an expression she could not read, but she thought maybe, just maybe, it might have been respect. The Crucible was held on Varek 9, a moon that orbited a gas giant and had earned its classification as a death world through centuries of killing anything that tried to survive there. The atmosphere was breathable but barely, and the vegetation was toxic, and the wildlife had evolved specifically to hunt and kill anything that moved. Trainees were dropped from orbit in individual pods and given 7 days to complete objectives while staying alive, and Academy made it very clear that rescue would only come if a trainee activated their emergency beacon, which would result in immediate elimination from the program. Una landed in a dense forest where the trees had bark like metal and leaves that cut exposed skin, and she spent her first hour establishing a secure position and checking her supplies. She had food for 3 days and water, purification equipment and a basic medical kit, and a single weapon, which was a pulse blade that could cut through most materials. The beer objectives were simple in theory, but deadly in practice, and she needed to reach 3 checkpoint locations across the moon and activate a beacon at each one before making her way to the extraction point. On her second day, she heard the sound of plasma fire in the distance, followed by screaming, and then silence. Someone had encountered the Velcor. The Velcor were the apex predators of Varek 9, and they hunted in packs of 6 to 12, and they were built like nightmares made flesh with 6 legs and jaws that could bite through combat armor. Academy records showed that Velcor had killed trainees in previous crucibles, and the official position was that such deaths were acceptable losses in the training of elite peacekeepers. Una moved carefully through the forest and avoided making noise and reached her first checkpoint without incident. On day 3, she was approaching her second checkpoint when she heard something that made her stop. It was a voice speaking in Nethari, and it was calling for help. She followed the sound and found Cirith, Kale lying against a fallen tree with blood seeping from a wound in her side, and her scales had lost their bright color, and her eyes were glazed with pain. Human, Cirith hissed when she saw Una. Come to watch me die. Una knelt beside her enemy and examined the wound and saw that something had torn through. Cirith sighed with claws or teeth, and the injury was serious, but not immediately fatal. What happened? Una asked. Velcor pack, Cirith said. They ambushed my squad, and we scattered, and I killed one, but another caught me before I could get away. Where's the rest of your squad? Gone. Cirith laughed bitterly. They left me behind because a wounded Nethari is just bait for predators. Una pulled out her medical kit and began treating the wound, and Cirith watched her with confusion. What are you doing? Cirith demanded. Stopping the bleeding. Una replied. Why? Una looked at her and said, Because you need help. I have done nothing but torment you since you arrived. Cirith said, I sabotaged your equipment and falsified your schedule and tried to get you killed in the night exercise. I know. Una said, Then why are you helping me? Una finished applying the bandage and sat back on her heels. Because that is what humans do, she said simply. Cirith stared at her as if she had grown a second head, and Una stood and offered her hand. Can you walk? Una asked. I think so. Cirith replied, and she took Una's hand and allowed the human to help her stand. They had taken perhaps 20 steps when Una heard something that made her blood run cold. It was a low clicking sound coming from multiple directions at once. Velcor, Cirith whispered, and her voice cracked with fear. They tracked my blood. Una looked around and saw shapes moving through the trees, and she counted at least 8 of them, and they were massive creatures with bodies built for killing. We need to move, Una said. I cannot outrun them. Cirith replied. Just leave me and save yourself. Una grabbed Cirith's arm and started walking. I am not leaving you, she said. Now move." They walked as fast as Sirith's injury would allow him behind. Them the Velcor followed, and Yuna could hear their clicking grow more excited as they sensed weakened prey. "They are going to catch us," Sirith said. "No." Yuna replied, "They are not." The Velcor were ambush predators built for short explosive bursts of speed, and they were waiting for the right moment to strike. But Yuna understood something about predator behavior that came from millions of years of human evolution. She understood that most predators were not built for endurance. Yuna set a pace that was steady and sustainable, and she helped Sirith keep moving, and the Velcor followed, but they did not attack because the prey was not running, and prey that did not run was confusing to predators that relied on chase instincts. Hours passed and the moon's sun moved across the sky, and Yuna kept walking. The Velcor continued to follow, but their clicking became less excited and more frustrated, and some of them started to fall behind. "How are you still moving?" Sirith asked, and her voice was weak from exhaustion and blood loss. "Humans do not stop," Yuna said. "We cannot run fast, but we can run forever." More hours passed, and the terrain changed from forest to rocky hills, and Yuna's legs burned and her lungs ached, but she did not slow down. The Velcor pack had dwindled from 8 to 5 to 3, and those 3 were panting heavily, and their movements had become sluggish. Finally, as the second sun began to set, the last of the Velcor stopped following Yuna, turned and watched as the massive predators stood in the distance and stared at her with something that might have been confusion or might have been respect. Then they turned and walked away. Sirith collapsed against a rock and looked at Yuna with eyes full of disbelief. "You outlasted them," Sirith said. "You outlasted apex predators through sheer endurance." Yuna sat down heavily beside her and allowed herself to feel the exhaustion that she had been pushing aside for hours. "That is what persistence predators do," Yuna said. "We follow and we follow and we never stop until our prey gives up." Sirith was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was different, somehow softer and more uncertain. "I was wrong about you," Sirith said. "I thought you were prey, but you are not." Yuna looked at the Nathari, who had made her life miserable for weeks, and she felt no anger, only a tired kind of understanding. "I am not your enemy, Sirith," Yuna said. "I never was." They sat together as darkness fell, and somewhere in the distance the Velcor howled in frustration at the prey that had refused to die, and Yuna allowed herself a small smile, because she was still alive and still moving forward, and that was all that mattered. The transport ship descended through gray clouds, and Yuna Park pressed her face against the window to see her new home for the next 3 years. The Galactic Ranger Academy spread across a valley on Vara 7 like a small city made of dark metal and stone, and everywhere she looked, she saw training grounds and obstacle courses and buildings that seemed designed to intimidate. She was the first human ever accepted into the Apex Division, and she knew that meant something important but right. Now all she felt was very small. The ship landed with a heavy thud, and the doors opened to reveal a crowd of trainees from dozens of species, and Yuna stepped out carrying her single bag and immediately felt every eye turned toward her. She stood at barely 5 feet and 6 inches tall and weighed perhaps 130 pounds, and compared to the massive creatures around her, she looked like a child who had wandered into the wrong place. A reptilian trainee with scales the color of poison stood near the front of the crowd, and her yellow eyes narrowed as she examined the human. "Is this a joke?" the reptilian asked, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Yuna kept walking toward the registration building and pretended she had not heard, but the reptilian followed her with 2 others of her kind. "I am Sirith Kale of the Nathari Dominion," the reptilian announced, "and I want to know why the Academy is letting prey animals into the Apex Division." Yuna stopped and turned to face Sirith, who towered over her by at least 2 feet and had claws that looked capable of cutting through metal. "I am Yuna Park," she said simply, "and I am here to train just like everyone else." Sirith laughed, and it was an ugly sound full of contempt. Train for what? Sirith asked. You have no claws and no fangs and no venom, and your skin looks like it would tear if I breathed on it too hard. Several other trainees had gathered to watch, and Yuna noticed that none of them seemed inclined to defend her, and why would they when she looked so obviously out of place? I qualified for admission, Yuna said. The same tests everyone else took. Political gesture. Sirith hissed. The Galactic Council wanted to make humans feel included. So they lowered the standards, and here you are. Yuna had no response to that because she could not prove it wrong, and so she simply turned and continued toward registration. The registration officer was a four-armed creature called a Trainee, and he looked at Yuna with something like pity as he processed her information. Trainee Park. He said, You have been assigned to Squad 17 under Commander Vrexis. Thank you. Yuna replied. Squad 17 is the remedial squad. The officer added quietly, I'm sorry. Yuna took her assignment card and walked to the barracks without showing any emotion on her face, but inside she felt the weight of what she was facing settle onto her shoulders. The opening ceremony took place that evening in a great amphitheater carved from the mountainside, and hundreds of trainees sat in rows while instructors watched from an elevated platform. Commander Vrexis was a Torvan, and his species looked like someone had combined a wolf with a bear, and given it the intelligence to command armies, and he stood at the center of the platform with his arms crossed and his golden eyes scanning the crowd. The Apex Division exists for one purpose, Vrexis announced in a voice that carried without amplification. We train the deadliest peacekeepers in the galaxy. He paused and let that sink in. Each of you was selected because your species has proven itself among the apex predators of the known worlds. He continued, Tonight you will demonstrate the traits that make your kind dangerous. One by one, trainees stepped forward to showcase their natural weapons. The Netheri displayed their venomous fangs and retractable claws. The Urkith showed their massive strength by lifting boulders that weighed thousands of pounds. The Torvan demonstrated their speed and their jaws that could crush starship hull plating. And then it was Yuna's turn. She walked to the center of the amphitheater and felt the weight of every stare. And she knew that whatever she did would be judged harshly. Trainee Park, Vrexis said. Demonstrate your species. Apex trait. Yuna stood there for a moment, and then she spoke. Humans are persistent predators, she said. We do not have claws or venom or great strength, but we can pursue prey across any terrain for any distance until it collapses from exhaustion. Silence followed, and then laughter. It started with Sirith and spread through the crowd like a disease, and soon hundreds of the galaxy's deadliest predators were laughing at the tiny human who claimed that walking was her weapon. Vrexis did not laugh, but he did not silence the others either, and Yuna returned to her seat with her head held high even as the mockery continued. After the ceremony, she found her quarters in the Squad 17 barracks, and they were the smallest and least maintained rooms in the academy, and she was not surprised. She unpacked her few belongings and sat on her bed and allowed herself one moment of doubt before pushing it away. A knock came at her door, and she opened it to find a massive creature standing in the hallway. He was an Urkith, nearly 8 feet tall, with fur the color of dark earth and eyes that held no warmth, but also no cruelty. I am Doran, he said. I am also assigned to Squad 17. I am Yuna, she replied. Doran nodded once, and then walked away without another word, and Yuna closed her door and wondered if that counted as making a friend. Later that night, she walked through the academy grounds to clear her head, and she heard voices coming from around a corner, and she stopped to listen. The human will wash out within a month, Sirith was saying. Her kind does not belong here. Then why was she admitted? Another voice asked politics. Sirith answered with disgust. The humans joined the Galactic Council last year, and they wanted to prove they deserve a seat at the table. so the council pressured the academy to accept one. That seems unfair to her, the other voice said. Unfair. Cirith repeated. She is a soft, weak little thing pretending to be a predator. And when she fails, it will prove what everyone already knows, which is that humans are not apex anything. Yuna stepped back into the shadows and made her way to her quarters. Without being seen, she lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about what Cirith had said. Maybe the Netherese was right, and maybe humans did not belong among apex predators. But Yuna had not come here to prove a political point. She had come here because she believed in something about her species that the others could not see yet. Humans were not the strongest or the fastest or the deadliest, but they were something else entirely. They were the creatures that never stopped. Coming and Yuna intended to show them exactly what that meant. 6 weeks passed and Yuna finished last in almost everything. The speed trials saw her outpaced by creatures who could move faster than her eyes could track, and the strength tests left her struggling with weights that others lifted with single limbs, and the combat exercises ended with her on her back more times than she could count. But she never quit, and she never complained, and she showed up every single day, ready to try again. Cirith noticed this, and it seemed to make the Netherese angry in a way that Yuna did not fully understand. Why do you keep coming back? Cirith demanded one morning after Yuna had been thrown to the ground for the 5th time in sparring practice. Yuna stood up and wiped dirt from her face and said, "Because training is not over yet." The answer only made Cirith angrier, and the harassment began to escalate beyond words. One day, Yuna arrived at the equipment room to find her gear had been damaged and the straps on her pack had been cut, and her water filtration unit had been cracked. She reported it as an equipment malfunction and requisitioned new supplies without naming any suspects. Another day, she received a schedule notification telling her that her squad's training location had changed. And when she arrived at the new location, she found herself alone in an empty field. While her actual squad trained on the other side of the academy, she ran the entire distance and arrived late, and Commander Vrexis gave her extra conditioning work as punishment, but she accepted it without explanation. The other trainees in Squad 17 watched these things happen, and some of them felt uncomfortable, but none of them spoke up because Cirith came from a powerful family, and opposing her meant making enemies. Doran the Urkith said nothing, but Yuna noticed that he had started positioning himself between her and the Netherese during group exercises one evening. Vrexis announced a night navigation exercise through the Academy's wilderness simulation chamber. You will be dropped at random points in the terrain, and you must reach the checkpoint by dawn. Vrexis explained. Work alone or in groups, but reach the checkpoint or face remedial training. The wilderness chamber was a massive, enclosed ecosystem designed to simulate dangerous planetary conditions, and trainees had been injured there before, though deaths were rare. Yuna was dropped at her starting point and immediately noticed that it was much farther from the checkpoint than regulations allowed, and she understood that someone had altered her coordinates. She checked her equipment and found that her navigation beacon had been disabled, and her emergency signal would not function properly. Cirith had decided to make the human fail in a way that could not be ignored. Yuna looked at the distant mountains that marked the direction of the checkpoint, and she started walking. The terrain was brutal with thick vegetation and steep ravines and creatures that growled in the darkness, and any other trainee would have called for emergency extraction. But Yuna did not stop. She walked through the night, and when she grew tired, she kept walking, and when her legs burned with exhaustion, she kept walking, and when the first light of dawn appeared on the horizon, she was still walking. The checkpoint was a temporary camp where trainees gathered as they completed the exercise, and Cirith arrived early with her squad, expecting to hear that the human had failed or been rescued. Instead, she watched as Yuna emerged from the tree line 18 hours after the exercise began. The human was covered in mud and scratches, and her uniform was torn, and she looked like she might collapse at any moment, but she walked into the checkpoint on her own 2 feet and reported her completion to the supervising officer. Commander Vrexis stood nearby, and his golden eyes tracked Yuna's movement with an expression that Sirith could not read. Trainee Park, Vrexis said. Your starting coordinates were significantly outside the standard parameters. Yes, Commander, Yuna replied. Did you request assistance or extraction? No, Commander. Why not? Yuna paused and seemed to consider the question carefully before answering. Because I could still walk, she said. Vrexis stared at her for a long moment and then nodded once and turned away. Doran approached Yuna as she sat down heavily on a supply crate, and without saying anything, he handed her a container of water. She took it and drank, and neither of them spoke, but something had shifted between them. Later that day, as trainees prepared to return to the main academy building, Sirith confronted Yuna directly. You should have failed, the Nethari hissed. You should have given up and gone home where you belong. Yuna looked up at Sirith, and for the first time there was something hard in her eyes. I am not going anywhere, Yuna said. Why? Sirith demanded, and there was genuine frustration in her voice. Why will you not quit when everyone can see that you do not belong here? Yuna stood up slowly and faced the creature that had tormented her for weeks. Because you have not beaten me yet, Yuna said, and until you do, I will keep getting back up. Sirith's claws extended involuntarily, and for a moment, it seemed like she might attack the human right there in front of everyone. But Commander Vrexis was watching and other instructors were present, and Sirith was not foolish enough to assault a fellow trainee in plain view. The crucible is coming, Sirith said quietly so only Yuna could hear. 7 days on a death world with real predators and no safety nets. And when you die out there, everyone will finally see the truth. Yuna did not flinch. I will see you at the crucible then, she replied. Sirith turned and walked away, and Yuna sat back down on the supply crate and closed her eyes. Her body was exhausted beyond anything she had ever experienced, but somewhere deep inside her something was burning brighter than before. She had walked 18 hours through hostile terrain without stopping, and she had arrived under her own power, and for the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt like she was starting to prove something. Not to the others, and not to Sirith, but to herself. She could do this. She could endure anything they threw at her, because that was what humans did. They endured and they adapted, and they refused to stay down no matter how many times they were knocked to the ground. The crucible was coming, and Sirith thought it would break her. But Yuna knew something that the Nethari did not understand yet. Humans were not built to be the strongest or the fastest. They were built to be the last ones standing. And Yuna intended to still be standing long after everyone else had given up.